All right. Well, good morning again, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. Again, this is Timothy Schoenhoven with the South Dakota Department of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Very excited to have you all on the call this morning. With me, we have Ewan Corral from the Local Foods Coalition, who's done a lot of outstanding work helping put this together. So thank you so much to Ewan. And we're privileged to be able to work together. And Feeding South Dakota, we've got Matt Burns on the line today, who's going to be talking with us about this program. So thank you, Matt, for your time, and thank you all for taking the time out of your morning to join here with us. Again, this is a cool opportunity to sort of, what we want to do today is talk about what this program is for those of you who aren't already familiar, and then have just hopefully a time of open discussion and Q&A about how it works, how it could work for your farm. We really want this to be an opportunity for you to learn more about the program and see yourself using it, understand how it can work for you and what the program is meant to do for the state of South Dakota, for the producers in our communities in our state. So briefly, just wanted to open up by mentioning the sort of purpose of the program. It's sort of a two-folded program on the procurement side and the delivery side, or the producer side and the community side. We, the state and Feeding South Dakota, have funding through the U.S. Department of Agriculture Ag Marketing Service to procure food from our producers in the state, and then deliver that locally grown food to communities in need. So there's both a market opportunity for producers and then a food assistance aspect of it for our communities. So with that as sort of our general frame of mind, I want to go ahead and first offer Ewan, if you have any opening comment you want to make, and then we'll go to Matt from Feeding South Dakota.
No, I think, Tim, hello, everybody. You set that up well. Just welcome. And we hope to answer some questions and get some local foods purchased for this program. Thank you.
All right, Matt, I believe we'll turn it over to you.
Matt, I think you're on mute still.
My apologies. Sometimes Zoom doesn't work straight away. Do you got me now?
We got you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. And Timothy, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. It's been great working with the State Department of Ag and the USDA on this program, really getting up to speed. I think we started making our initial purchases kind of very late in the season last year in August, and to date, we've purchased and distributed about 116,000 pounds and almost $157,000 worth of product, and really looking to take that and into a whole new gear as we get into the growing season for this year. Not a lot of activity over the winter months. It was really limited, of course, outside the growing season, but I think we have a good roadmap going forward to really kick this thing in gear. The key to this process is the orderly way in which we take in the applications from the interested producers, and then vet those internally and work with producers and seeing exactly what they have to offer, the timing with which they have to offer it, the price that they're looking to get for it, and then the quantities and how best to get that to the Feeding South Dakota, so then we can distribute it to our agencies and potentially to our mobile distribution outlets. To give you some point of reference, on a monthly basis, we have over 120 mobile distributions across the state, out of Sioux Falls, Pierre, and Rapid City. And we also serve around 250 agencies across the state as well. So there is a lot of outlets for our food. There's a lot of need out there, and we actually serve all 66 counties at varying levels, depending on how many agencies we have there in mobile distributions. So again, very pleased to be a part of this program, as it certainly supplements what we have to purchase through various networks that we have access to, and the large donor networks which we get food through as well. So it's another key avenue for us to receive quality product food and benefit the local producers, and then able to provide another very high quality and nutritious product for the folks of high need that we serve. So that's just kind of a high level overview. And Timothy, if you want to just structure this, and I'd be happy to answer what questions I can and know. And if there's something that we don't know, but then I'll work with Timothy to try to get this group the answers.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. And again, we really appreciate at the state the outstanding work Feeding South Dakota has done to get this program started. This is, for everyone on the call, a new program at the federal level through U.S. Department of Agriculture Marketing Service. So South Dakota was fortunately one of the first states that was able to set up a cooperative agreement with them. And thanks to Feeding South Dakota's assistance being involved from the very beginning, we were able to get that agreement in place right away. And working with Matt and his team has made it much smoother to start jumping right into the procurement. Matt mentioned that it took a little while. We were sort of at the end of the growing season when we got started. So we're really excited to see what we can do to make this, a little bit more active and aggressive this upcoming season. But for folks as reference, a lot of other states have perhaps some more intricate and complicated structures to their programs. And so we're fortunate that Feeding South Dakota is on board to help make this a little bit of a smoother on-ramp than it otherwise may have been. So we're really grateful to have that structure in place. And now we're thankful for the opportunity to talk with you all about how we can continue to make it better and successful for everyone. So I think before we turn it over to the whole room, we want to briefly make sure that everyone has a chance to hear kind of two main points, maybe in summary fashion. First of all, being sort of who can participate and what kind of products are in play here. And then secondly, maybe a brief synopsis of that logistical transaction. Matt, you mentioned it briefly. We can go maybe slightly into that a little bit more, and then we'll turn it over for direct questions from the audience, so that way we can make as much use of your time as possible. So on the producer eligibility and working with you all front under this program, this is open to all South Dakota producers, anyone who's growing food here in South Dakota. So Matt, what has that been like for you all so far? What kind of success have you seen people have? What is, from the producer angle, what have they brought in that's made it easy for your all's team to make something happen with a producer under this program so far?
Yeah, we've have good relationships with several producers, mostly in the central and western part of the state thus far. If looking to get some more producers here on the eastern side, just to kind of balance things out and to make sure we have good representation across the state. But we've got some wonderful products. We've been able to source a lot of produce products. We've got ground beef, pork sausage, milk and cheese, and a lot of garden products: tomatoes, winter squash, rather bell peppers, radishes, green beans, sweet corn, onions, carrots, watermelon. So this just a kind of a snapshot of really some of the really wonderful things that our producers grow here in South Dakota. We're looking to form relationships and get more of those types of items from more producers, and certainly in greater number and across the state. Just key to follow the correct process, and that is for each producer who's interested in forming an agreement with us to go through the application process, talk with Cullen Winter or email who's on the call as well, and we'll get folks signed up. It's actually worked very smooth to fill out that application, and then we make telephone contact and try to get some of the details again about what kinds of product are available, the potential quantities, how we might be able to source that, and certainly at what price the producer is willing to take or needs for their product. And we can make a decision based upon those factors about if we're able to enter an agreement. But it's a proven process thus far, and it's worked very well. Very pleased to get a wide variety of things here and get that out to the folks who really need it.
Matt, so is the application available online somewhere, or is that something that comes directly from an email from Colin?
I believe it is online. Cullen, if you could weigh in here and see the best way for folks to get in touch with you, but we have a variety of ways to get that application in folks' hand.
Sorry, I had a little problems getting mute. Most of them have been through email questionnaires. Tim I believe it is somewhere because I have a SharePoint where I've seen some of the electronic versions come in as well. But most often it's just via email.
Okay.
And this is Timothy. I plugged into the meeting chat. If for those of you who are looking at this meeting through your computer, you can open up the chat function, and there's a link to DANR's website. And on that website is some general information about the program, and there's a printable PDF questionnaire. So if that's your preference, you can print that off and fill it out. There's also a link to a Google survey form, and you can fill that out, and then that directly notifies Colin and myself that you've submitted that information. And that includes some of those basic things Matt was talking about, such as who you are, where you are, what you have, when you're interested in selling it, and for how much.
So I see in the chat, a question came in as when a deadline is. And my understanding is there is no deadline. It's a rolling process. So, one other thing that I hope that we can dig in a little bit about is if there are any like contract minimums, like if you are, do producers have to have X amount of either in quantity or weight or dollar amount in order to, to be in line for one of these contracts and one of these purchases?
Anyway, so she was the one who initially called me, so the board and I.
So from our perspective, we don't say that there's a contract minimum, but we also are realists in that sometimes it takes a certain amount of quantity to make it, respective of everybody's time and effort to get that to us, because there's transportation costs. Sometimes when it comes in, we have to store it either in a cooler. There's finite space in each of our locations for cooler, a space like that. So ideally, we would like to have a quantity that we could get in and get it immediately out to our distribution networks. Candidly, if somebody is offering just a small amount of produce on a weekly basis, like less than a pickup load full or something like that, that's going to be difficult for us to deal with, candidly, because of the scale of our operations. We get things in by the semi-load, and we know that South Dakota producers, most of them are not going to be able to have that, and that's not what we're asserting. But we also want to be respectful of the time of our team and our staff to be able to handle all those different streams of products coming in. So what we strongly prefer is if a person makes that application, let's have that one-on-one discussion. Let's have that, inside that application space to find out exactly what amount of product we're talking about. And then we can make that decision. So we're not going to just tell somebody, well, don't apply because we don't think you have enough. No, let's apply and have that conversation so we can come to a reasoned decision based upon the metrics or the numbers.
And right now, especially for our vegetable producers, folks are getting ready to plan. So I would imagine this would be a good time to have those conversations and potentially get into contract, because then folks could be growing, say, potatoes specifically for this contract. And so I would encourage people to consider this program as they're planning for the growing season.
Absolutely. In fact, we have been in conversations with some producers, and we actually have a roadmap or a plan that covers the entire growing season. This producer sent us what they have, when it's going to be available, and we've come up to an agreement to say, okay, well, we take this much quantity there, here, in across the growing season in various months, and that plan's already in place. So if there are growers that want to contact us about that, let's have that conversation. I think that that's very appropriate in this space, and we would look forward to that conversation.
One of the other pieces of this I'd like to bring forward, because we talked a little bit about logistics, getting it all the way to one of the Feeding South Dakota distribution points. It's also my understanding that there are some creative ways we can use this. For example, this program, for example, if we know that there is a rural school with a high number of children's participant who receive free and reduced lunch, and there is a producer who can, have a transaction that will directly go to that population, that it doesn't have to route all the way to Feeding South Dakota, but that Feeding South Dakota can be part of the transaction, but the products can actually go to the end user.
Well, if my understanding is if we're going to be involved, if Feeding South Dakota is going to be involved in the distribution piece at all, then it needs to go through, come to us and go through either our mobile distributions or one of our agency partners that we have a relationship with. Because if we have very strict food handling rules and accountability rules when it comes to handling of any food that comes through us via grant program or through our own purchase or donation networks. And so if we get too far askance outside that established route, then we're going to have to take a very close look at that and see if the regulations that we're responsible to comport with that model. I don't know that. I don't know that it doesn't, but I need to do some more research on that.
Okay. And Tim, was there a second piece that you wanted to bring forward?
I think maybe just on that, because that's been a pretty kind of steady undercurrent of discussion, Matt. Understanding that Feeding South Dakota has, you have your other programs that you're also running, and you have your existing distribution routes, your existing partners, and you have your food safety and accountability rules and the regulations to which you're responsible. And so those are all things that would have to be navigated. Maybe kind of looking at the sort of principle or philosophy behind it. What would someone who's, for example, several hours away from Sioux Falls or Pierre or Rapid City and is interested in participating, maybe in one of our further afield counties that's not near the interstate, and they would be interested, but it's not necessarily economical for Feeding South Dakota to go get the food or for them to come all the way to you, especially if they have something perishable, and you all are able to have a conversation about consistent opportunities to sell. What kind of things should producers on this line have prepared to enter a discussion with you that your team would need to have them able to answer as you're considering whether or not you all could be more creative in doing maybe a local pass off where Feeding South Dakota retains oversight but doesn't necessarily have to handle the transportation or something like that? What are the questions that they would need to answer for you as you look at that?
So there is the potential that we might have an agency partner in some of these areas that are further away from one of our distribution centers, and it is possible that we might be able to do the direct handoff from the producer to the agency partner. But there's several things that have to be in place. We still have to be able to have a place where we can weigh that product, because we have to track all that by weight through our system and for the grant. So there has to be a few things like that in place. There is a possibility that if the producer was unable to deliver the food to a Feeding South Dakota distribution center in Pierre, Rapid City, or Sioux Falls, that Timothy and I have talked that we don't want that to necessarily be a barrier. We want to have a conversation about what are some ways that we could get that, still receive that food and transport that food. One of the things that might be helpful is if a producer had a transportation, a third-party transporter that could get that to us in mind, that we could have a conversation with, and maybe there's some space within this grant to offset some of those costs. Unfortunately, I wish I had a truck that could go get and pick up from every producer, but my trucks are very well fully involved in transporting the food out to on our own mobile distributions and to our own agency partners. So it's a rare occurrence indeed where we would be able to send one of our trucks to go pick it up because the schedules are so tight with our own operations. But again, I don't want that to necessarily be a barrier. Let's talk about that. And if there is a third party transporter that we might be able to work with, Timothy and I, again, no commitments, no guarantees, but let's have that conversation to see if we can work something out. Is that fair, Timothy?
Yeah, I think that represents what we've talked about. So a potential solution for a producer here who's more remote and maybe already maybe they're very aware, or maybe Feeding South Dakota could connect them to a local agency partner and say, hey, that might be a reasonable destination. And then, but the producer could potentially bring in ideas about the transportation solution aspect of it, understanding that Feeding South Dakota under this grant doesn't have the resources to invent new necessarily transportation capacity, and the existing transportation capacity is relatively committed. So that would be an area where the producer could bring potential suggestions. Maybe also Feeding South Dakota has sort of standards about the product quality and things like that. If a producer was going out, if there was an alternative logistical arrangement in place, how would Feeding South Dakota approach kind of the oversight regarding your like food quality and safety standards?
Yeah, well, we would rely on our agency partner to where that gets delivered to inspect that and make sure that they would want to feel comfortable being able to put that on their shelves for the people that they serve to come get it. And so we have various ways to make sure that our food quality throughout our system is strong. Those agency partners are accountable to an agreement with us, and so they know what to look for, and they want to have the best available product and most nutritious, viable products, of course, for those that they serve. I did want to address real quick. I see Bob typed in a message. Are there any max parameters for volume and price per unit? And how is that applied? Thus far, we have not had to have a discussion about max parameters for volume. I haven't been challenged in that regard. As far as price per unit, yes, I mean, the idea of this grant, and Timothy and I have had conversations about this, is to support the local producers. But at some point, if the price per pound or the price per unit is just so far above what market value is, we still have to look at this with a straight face and realize that we are responsible to be good stewards of the taxpayer funds. So while there is not a max volume or price per unit established, Timothy and I have in these conversations, we're going to use our good sense and know if that's something that is really out of the range. And so I can't commit to any specific price, but I think we all realize that there's a fair market price, and then it's reasonably support the producers and cover their input costs and help them maintain a reasonable profit margin. And then there's something that might be beyond that we all might look at and say, I don't know if that's in the best interest of this grant program and the spirit and intent of what it's offered. So I hope that's a sufficient answer without committing to any specific range.
And I think I would just add to that point, and in no way is this meant to be that producers would be, quote, donating their product. I mean, the idea is that they will receive a fair market price for their product, a competitive price.
Absolutely. This is not a donation. This is a completely compensated for fair market price that we agree on, complete compensation.
Right. And just in terms of giving folks an understanding about how much funds are left that we could expend this growing season and into the end of the year. So, folks know that there are funds out there to be spent.
Yeah, we have a good amount of funds left in the phase one of the grant, and so we're looking to make those connections and enter into agreements with producers and get these monies out there and get these quality products that we know the South Dakota producers are known for into the hands of those of the hungry.
And anything else, Tim?
Matt, there's a follow-up question in the chat along that price is at compared at the retail level. I'm not sure if I'm interpreting that question exactly correctly. Bob, if you wanted, you're welcome to unmute.
Yeah, my question was just basically is like, when you say fair market value, is that at the wholesale level? In other words, are we saying, okay, we'll sell you tomatoes at $1 a pound and retail they're $2.50, right? Is that how that works, or is it all retail level comparisons and payments?
I have envisioned this, and we have designed our compensation at around the retail level. We realize that the producers who produce this product have significant input costs. Those are going. I'm a farm kid myself. I realize that's how it works, and that's a continuing struggle. So we think that it is fair and reasonable to compensate producers at a fair retail level. That's the philosophy I've been having going forward, and that seemed to work well. We've got great agreements with certain producers thus far. Let's get into this and get some more agreements and really use this grant how it was intended.
Ewan, did you or coalition leadership have any other questions for Matt, or else do we want to go to the room if anybody else would like to unmute and ask a question?
No, I think we can open it up to the room.
Tim, there was another question in the chat as well.
Oh yeah, thanks, Colin. So this is depending on your operation, you might have this question as well. Bob's asking about whether there's a stop point or maybe a cutoff for the amount of processing involved, tomatoes versus salsa, milk versus ice cream. So my understanding, and this would be a conversation that Matt and Cullen would have with you on a case-by-case basis, but in general, USDA's definition of what is considered local and regional food is pretty all-encompassing. So what that means is, and Matt, you can maybe share more about how this has worked out at your end, but most things are going to be pretty straightforward. If you have a tomato, that's good. If you have salsa, or what we might call value-added products or more processed goods, that's where with the federal funding it gets a little trickier. Generally speaking, if you can prove that if each ingredient also meets the definition of local or regional, then that's more possible. If you have something that's partially local and then the rest of it is something that is not from South Dakota grown, that's less likely to work out in terms of the federal requirements.
Yeah, from our perspective, I mean, we deal in a lot of fresh produce, and we would prefer to handle it that way because we're set up, especially in this program, to kind of keep it simpler that way. And especially, we want to steer away from anything that might be open to a question or a gray area with the grant when it comes to the processing. And we've had to turn down producers because they couldn't certify that every part of their product was actually from South Dakota. So in order just to keep it cleaner and simpler, we'd like to stick as close as we could to the garden products, the raw products. We have taken ground beef, pork sausage, things like that, cheese, but it was all certified that it came 100% from South Dakota producers.
I see a hand up, and that's Megan.
Hi, my name is Megan. I work with Dakota Rural Action, and I just have a follow-up question about your discussion on the median person for more rural producers. In my perspective, I would say that our producers hold their standard of their product at a really high level and would want to give the best product forward, especially for this program. And I just would be hopeful or encourage maybe like a standard of practice checklist that that Feeding South Dakota might produce or have available for producers that they check off, and then have like a Feeding South Dakota staff person sign off to be that oversight on the transaction. But as being good stewards of the grant dollars, I think that could be a more efficient way to distribute, especially more rural producers to the people in need in their local communities. Just some thoughts I have.
Thank you, Megan. From the chat here, I'm seeing, so there's one question that I think is kind of outside the program. We have an online market where customers purchase from several farmers at once. We've discussed offering a Feeding South Dakota donation as an option. The customer would add some dollar amount donation to their cart, and the producers would put together that value of produce to donate to Feeding South Dakota and would receive that money from the sale. Is this something worth setting up?
So that is indeed, that's a great question. That is indeed outside the content of this grant. But if is it Chara? If you could put your contact information or get that to Timothy, we'll connect you with the right person here at Feeding South Dakota that could answer that question and put some more form and substance behind that.
And then we've got another question about beef. Are you only taking certain cuts, or would you be interested in a full steer price?
So thus far, the beef we've had has just been ground beef. We are certainly open to other cuts. It just, what we're required to do is that it come from a USDA inspected locker, or it's on the state of South Dakota certified processor list. So if you have other cuts, I encourage you to make an application. We'll have that conversation offline about what cuts you have and what kind of pricing you're talking about. And then the other questions, of course, about where you're located and the quantities.
And then from my perspective, agencies tend to really like the ground beef product. I don't think anyone would be upset if they received a steak, T-bone or whatever, but the most popular request we get is just for plain ground beef.
And the reasons for that, I think it's pretty clear to everyone. It's just so versatile. And when we do a box pack for our mobile distributions, we choose other menu items around to complement the protein product that we're putting in there. And ground beef is so easy to complement in so many different ways through purchased product we have or donated product. And for those that we serve, it's just so easy to prepare. That's why it's the most popular. But certainly let's have a discussion about other cuts if that's desired.
Any other questions? Please feel free to put them in the chat or come off mute. Thank you. Megan's added a list of the slaughter processing facilities, the state-based.
Yeah, and so just a word about how that works. We had a producer in the Pierre area say that they had ground pork sausage, and so our first step was to just ask them who their locker or processor was. We contacted that processor. They sent us their state certification that they were an inspected locker and that we're on the state list, and we're good to go. And that relationship has worked well. I think we've got a couple different loads now of ground pork sausage from that producer. So it's really that simple.
This is Nancy Kirstein. I'm a producer here in Eastern South Dakota. If you had a crystal ball, what is the longevity of this grant funding? I mean, we have the capacity to grow more. We have more land that we could grow on. And with that comes certain expenses and those sorts of things. But to invest in that kind of infrastructure for just a year doesn't really make sense. So do you feel like this is something that is going to be funded for multiple years? Is it something that a producer, because it could change the, for a lot of small producers, this could be very beneficial for them, but it does change their growing, parameters. So what do you feel the longevity of this is? Or could the relationship extend past the grant?
Well, from my perspective, I know that the grant term is finite. I think we've got a couple years left on the first phase of this grant. And as you've well noted, it's hard to gauge the winds going forward on if grants are going to be renewed. There is, and Timothy, if you wouldn't mind speaking to the second part, there is another part of LFPA which we're looking at and considering, but even that has a finite time frame. I'm keenly aware that it's difficult for producers to scale up and in the hopes of having a long-term grant, and then are fearful of the rug getting jerked out from under them. There is a possibility that some of these relationships could endure from Feeding South Dakota. However, being very candid, the grant dollars injected into this in many ways are above and beyond what we would normally pay for product at scale, because with our donor dollars and in doing purchase product, as you would expect, we have to make that go a long ways. And so we're trying to, we buy ground beef by the semi-load from National Beef out of Kansas City. And we're trying to get that for under $2 a pound, or around $2 a pound. And I wouldn't expect any South Dakota producer to be able to make any money or stay in business doing that. And that's just an example on ground beef. So I would like to see that extend, but the economies of making that extend absent a grant funding are kind of dim, frankly. So Timothy, if you want to speak to how long you think this grant will continue.
So I know that Timothy's going to come in with some technical bits, and just for the edification of this group, these funds are cooperative agreement funds with the USDA, and there's many different iterations, and these funds are coming out of a tranche of funds from the USDA about supporting local and regional food systems in response to the pandemic, and understanding that local and regional food systems were much more sustainable and stayed online rather than the really kind of behemoth food systems that we have across the US. And so there is a big endeavor to continue these types of supports through the USDA and then to the state. So these are not competitive grant numbers. These are numbers that, or funds that the USDA, through watching our food system and having to respond at the federal level, believe that this will create a more robust food system for us, overall. So there's lots of, there's lots of work being done to ensure these types of funds, it might not be this exact funding, stay in place. And then I'll let Timothy talk about what's on the docket.
No, thank you, Ewan and Matt. You all both covered it pretty well. And thank you, Nancy, for the question. Very relevant to everyone. Be very specific. The current pool of funds is through June of next year. So we've got slightly over a year of our current authority. The round 2 that Matt mentioned, that would add an additional year to the program. But that would turn the 2-year program into a 3-year program. So that's an opportunity that we're looking at right now. And the application period for us for that is open right now. So those are that's sort of the lay of the land as far as I'm aware. Ian was very correct to bring up that there are sort of a ecosystem of opportunities out there right now. I know that our secretary's office had a sort of farm to school grant round last year that a variety of school districts were able to participate in. And then federally, there's a number of other opportunities going on right now, and I'm sure in the near future. So we'll keep our eye out for those as they come up, and other folks might hear about them. Bob Wyrick, who asked a question earlier, he's also a great resource for those of you who don't know him about kind of keeping tabs on federal funding opportunities with the Small Business Development Center. So that's sort of an ongoing situation. But for the purpose of this specific grant right now, the only thing that we know for certain is next June, and then potentially a year after that. So we will obviously keep everyone updated if the extension happens. But for right now, I think the most actionable intel for you all is, this growing season, and then over through next June.
Would somebody kind of explain the mechanics of payment to the producer? In other words, if I show up, with a pickup load of beef or whatever, is that payment, by the end of the week or next month, or, how is that taken care of, and what kind of paperwork is involved in that? And is there subsequent audit to that as well too?
So how we have it set up currently is Feeding South Dakota itself is paying the producers based upon a submitted invoice. That's typically done within a month's time frame. They try to get it out sooner than that. And then we submit on a monthly basis, I believe, I talked to my finance team for sure, those reimbursement requests to Timothy's team to reimburse us out of the grant.
Okay, so you pay the producer, and then you request the reimbursement from South Dakota Department of Ag and Natural Resources.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I'll add, just so folks are aware, Matt's not taking all of the credit, but I know that I've talked to a producer or two who have mentioned that they've received payments, in much shorter, like less than 2 weeks in some instances. So his team's really on top of it. And I think, having up to a month is, good to have in the back of your mind, but I know that some folks have had an even more quick experience than that.
Excellent. That's, in my world, where I think about things like accounts receivable a lot, that becomes a big issue for somebody, especially if they're if one of their larger customers is 15 days, 30 days, 45 days out. Thank you.
These have been great questions. I encourage folks to, ask your questions. It's not always that we get both Tim and Matt on the line. So please, don't be shy.
Has anyone been looking at this program and maybe have any specific questions about anything else about like product eligibility or logistics that you'd like to talk through with the group while we're on?
Are there any products that you're not taking and again, I'm coming at this from a vegetable grower standpoint, if I came to you with a giant truckload of eggplant, would that, are there things that you're just not interested in?
Well, let's have that conversation. It does come down to popularity of those items. So when we get a load like that in, if it's not something that is sufficient to put on a mobile distribution, then we have to put it on our agency menu, and then agencies order it from us. Well, that can take a while to disperse, and while it's there, it takes up cooler space. It's the clock's ticking on that produce, as everybody knows, and so we do have to be careful. We do try to stay in that lane of things that we do know are popular, and that we're going to be able to move quickly. That's the name of our game, is to get stuff in and get stuff out quickly, because oftentimes when we get it, the clock's been running a little bit. And so we want to make sure that product is as viable as it can be when it hits the folks that need it. But I encourage anyone, if they're curious about that, sign up. Let's ask those questions. We'll take those offline in that conversation between you and Cullen. And then if he has any questions about it, we can talk about it as a little larger group about products that may be outside the normal range of what we're used to getting.
And I know this might be an example from some other states that I've seen, but sort of to Ewan's earlier comments about the local and distribution point. If you're a producer that's in a community that might have particular interests or sort of special tastes or demands for certain products, and that's something you can supply, that might be helpful information to talk with Feeding South Dakota about as far as understanding that there might be something that's of particular interest in a particular area, but might not fit within Feeding South Dakota's typical, what they typically see move quickly. So if that's your situation, there could definitely be conversations about that. I know in other states I've seen certain communities needing something that's, halal or a certain type of product that's associated with a particular cultural event, things like that. And so it's definitely something that's theoretically doable within this program, but that would be information that you'd have to talk with Feeding South Dakota directly about. Matt, there is a question about eligibility requirements for raw honey.
Yeah, and candidly, I have to ask one of my product experts here about raw honey. We haven't seen that come in, even in some of our donations that I'm aware of. So I will get that question answered and reply through Timothy to the group. That is a great question.
Megan, I saw you come off. Yep.
Thanks. I just wanted to say thanks for considering the culturally relevant aspect of the food donation and wanting to pursue that. I think that's an important piece to the puzzle. I have actually, as a producer, reached out to Feeding South Dakota about this grant when it first came online. And I was just wondering the system has probably improved since I initially reached out. What is your anticipated response for inquiries, or is there, instead of the info@Feeding South Dakota the best email to ask about this grant specifically, or is there a person to contact to start the process? And my apologies if you mentioned it already.
No, the info is a great gateway, and then the staff member that takes those in knows exactly who to send that to. So, and just put in the subject line LFPA, and that's a great way to get it to where it needs to go.
And then Matt, to the point about kind of culturally relevant, are you working with, or do you have already in place distribution with any of the tribes or native-led organizations so that we can be encouraging of tribal producers to be reaching out? I know that I've had some inquiry about bison and bison going directly back into a tribal feeding program. So I'm curious about any of those established relationships or structures.
So we don't have any established structures in place. We're hoping to make more of those relationships and start those conversations, because we want to be sensitive to what individuals and groups want. And if they want something that's more relevant and specific to the culture and what they enjoy, then we need to know that. It gets to be difficult when you deal with the number and the scale of food that we move, on average over 1 million pounds a month, to get really specific sometimes. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. And so we encourage, if there's producers that want to be a part of this and ask those questions, let's not to be a broken record, but let's have that conversation. We want to make our contact available to them, and let's see what they have. And again, but we do want to be consistent with how we follow the process. And we're going to be asking the same questions, so we treat everyone the same in this process. Grant funding should be technically available to anyone who is inside the parameters that the grant is set up on. So just please encourage your contacts to have them reach out to us so we know who's out there and what they have.
That's a great answer, Matt. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. And I'll just add from the sort of the programmatic standpoint, that the Department of Agriculture and Natural Resources is stewarding this existing round of funding, but there, like we discussed before, there is a round 2 that's currently open, and tribal entities are eligible to apply for that, and USDA has some funding reserved at that national level for tribal entities to specifically apply for. So if you are in one of those communities or networks, or you engage with tribal producers and you interface with one of those organizations or governmental entities, that would certainly be something that you could talk with them about, because there might be 1 or 2 that are applying directly for these funds. And if one of them was to do that, they would have their own pool of funds that would last beyond the time that the state's funding is available.
Well, I'm going to need to jump off here if there's no further questions for me in order to get to my next commitment. But I just want to thank everybody for the opportunity again to talk about this. I appreciated working with Timothy and getting things in order that we've done so far. I anticipate, getting through this grant in the time frame and getting those funds out there and supporting the producers. That's what it's all about. We may not be able to get every agreement in place that we'd like, but we're sure going to try. But the key is, let's talk about it. Please apply. Let's communicate and see what we can do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate your time this morning.
You're welcome. Thank you all.
And Ewan, we don't have to go quite yet. If there are other questions, I see a question in the chat right now about whether you have to be an LLC or can a new producer join. And Ewan, weigh in here if you have comments from your experience with other programs, but I'm not sure if you technically need to be an LLC. You would need to have some sort of business structure in place for Feeding South Dakota to pay you, and you would have to be able to submit them an invoice that they can pay.
Correct.
And thank you very much, Megan. Again, we have a website set up for this program. There is a one-page handout that you're more than welcome to share or just use for your own personal reference. There is a print version or a PDF printable version of the questionnaire that you can take, which you could print and fill out if that's your preferred workflow, and then email it to info@Feeding South Dakota, or you can take the online survey, which will through Google go directly to them. And then my contact should be on there as well if you have more questions or if I can help you in any way. And I'll throw up here briefly in case anybody would like to write it down. My personal contact is on this slide here. And then again, there's that info@feedingsouthdakota.org email address, addressed, LFPA in the subject line. It's a great place to start if you are just sort of getting familiar with this program and would like to talk more. Ewan, did you have anything else you wanted to add, or were there any other questions from the group that we can answer today?
Yeah, I am, we just want to be available to make sure that we answer questions, encourage people to, utilize the program, inquire about the program. There are lots of people available to help connect you and help provide, technical questions or technical answers.
I would like to make a comment about the question earlier about being an LLC. I can't speak to the parameters of the program, but from my perspective, in terms of the consultations that I do, is I encourage many businesses to be LLCs because it protects, potentially a multi-generational legacy, and probably provides a little bit of a firewall, so to speak, for claims that you harmed me. You are making a sale It's not a donation, so you are making a sale. And however that goes, if there's something that goes wrong with that, then there's probably some liability that goes back through the chain if they can ascribe that. So if you are a producer, consider an LLC. They're not a tough deal. You just have to operate as an LLC. So keep that in mind. If you need assistance, talk to me or my colleagues across the state and the small business development centers.
Okay, we are here and available to answer any more specific questions about the program. There's been lots of, context left. Also note that the South Dakota Local Foods Coalition, you can find us, on Facebook and other social media outlets. Also, the folks at the South Dakota Specialty Producers Association and Dakota Rural Action and SDSU Extension agents. We are all kind of looped in, have an understanding of this program, and can also provide some technical assistance and some planning and get you hooked up, with either Feeding South Dakota or DANR. So we just want folks to know that there's lots of ways to start the engagement and start these conversations.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much, Ewan, and DANR. We appreciate the Local Foods Coalition and all the great work you all been doing to bring raise information awareness about this program, and thanks to USDA for their funding opportunity for this. Regarding whether a conservation district could qualify, it's a question that just came in.
Yep.
I am not 100% certain, Ewan. I don't know if you have a take on that question.
Well, I don't know why a conservation district would not be able to apply if you guys are growing food and you have a mechanism to sell food and a way to receive payment for that food. I don't see why you would not. The purpose is to provide local foods to a feeding program. That is like the main goal of these funds. So as long as you have those mechanisms in place, there's no reason why you could not sell the food.
Would it, and it might be potentially, if the production involves, if you're using sort of like a federally owned asset from another program or funding source or something like that, then the production of the food could potentially be associated with a separate funding source. But that would be a direct conversation.
Yeah, that would be a direct conversation and pretty technical, because I would imagine we will even find ourselves where folks are, say, recipients of SARE grant funds or the Beginning Farmer Rancher Development Funds, and they're growing food, even though they receive some other avenue of federal funds, they could still sell the food. And I don't think that precludes them from participating in the program. So, but I think, if those kinds of technical questions, we can kind of run them all the way up the chain back to USDA.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thank you again, everyone. Appreciate your time this morning. Appreciate all the questions, and hopefully this was helpful sort of information about the program and help you all kind of consider how it can help your operation and be a good opportunity for you. Thanks again, Ewan and Cullen and Matt, for your presence here this morning. And please follow up with me or Ewan or whoever is your contact to take the next step as you're ready to.
Yeah, it was a great turnout. We appreciate your time.
Thank y'all. Have a good morning.
All right. Bye-bye.